Hey everyone, glad you're here today. We're breaking down a case that happened in a place where people spent years leaving their doors unlocked. I take every episode seriously. I spend a lot of time digging through details and looking for real stories that genuinely stay with me. So if you enjoy this kind of content, support the channel with a like and a subscription. It really helps the channel grow. November 17th, 2007. Graham, Washington. Around 5 in the morning, a man named Jeff pulls up outside the home of his friends, Brian and Beverly Mock. They were supposed to head out hunting together. Usually, Brian would already be waiting by the door with his gear packed and ready. But this morning, the entire stretch of 70th Avenue is completely quiet. The porch light is off. Nobody answers the phone. The only thing that feels off is the bright flicker coming through the large living room window. The TV is still running. Jeff waits in his truck for a while, then eventually leaves, figuring his friends probably overslept. A couple hours later, he comes back because he can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. This time he steps out, walks toward the porch, and notices something he couldn't see in the dark earlier. The lower wooden panel of the front door has been kicked inward. Jeff bends down and looks through the opening. In the bluish light from the television, he sees a blanket on the floor. Sticking out from underneath it is part of a human leg. And across the light-colored carpet runs a thick, dark red streak. Why didn't Brian and Beverly wake up while someone was literally forcing their way into the house? And who left the television running beside the bodies all that time? We're going to break all of it down. To understand why this case hit so hard for everyone who knew the family, you first have to look at the life they had built by that November. Brian and Beverly Mock were the kind of couple people talked about, like they were made for each other. Blonde, athletic, always tan, the kind of pair that looked straight out of an American lifestyle magazine. But behind that image was real work and very normal, relatable goals. Brian Mock was born on October 25th, 1977, and grew up right there in Washington, alongside his sister Jennifer. Back at Decatur High School in Federal Way, people already knew him as the guy who could fix almost anything. He didn't just mess around with cars. He took them apart, figured out how everything worked, then put them back together. Half the time, the thing worked even better afterward. That curiosity eventually turned into a career. After high school, Brian got into heating and air conditioning work. Tough work, dirty work, long hours. He joined a company called Emerald Air in Auburn and quickly became the technician customers specifically asked for by name. He never cut corners, never showed up late. And honestly, in that industry, that alone made him stand out. You could hear Brian before you saw him. He had a loud voice, endless energy, and a way of telling stories that could get complete strangers laughing within minutes. He loved sports, a good steak on the grill, and buying new tools he probably didn't need but absolutely wanted anyway. But none of that came from wanting attention. That was just who he was. Loyal, reliable. The kind of guy where, if you called him at 3 in the morning needing help, he'd already be grabbing his keys before you finished explaining the situation. Beverly Slater was 2 years younger than her husband. She was born on March 16, 1979. She came from a big family, her mother Karen, her stepfather Rick, and 2 brothers. Bev never really fit into any category. She could show up to a camping trip looking completely put together, makeup done, hair styled, looking like she was headed to a photo shoot instead of the woods, and then be the first person starting the campfire and setting up tents. Back when she was younger, she took speed skating seriously and even planned on going professional at one point. But after a major back injury caused by a car accident, those plans disappeared overnight. A lot of people would have given up after something like that. Beverly didn't. She just found new passions instead. Hiking, scuba diving, motorcycles. She had the same grounded, loyal personality Brian did. They met in the spring of 2001, and there wasn't a bunch of drama or second guessing. Things clicked immediately. They shared the same interests, from water skiing to football Sundays. In 2004, during a vacation in Cancun, Brian proposed to her. 2 years later, on May 5th, 2006, they got married in Turks and Caicos. Small ceremony, close friends and family, perfect weather, exactly the kind of wedding they wanted. That same year, they bought 5 acres of wooded land in Graham. It became their place away from everything else. Quiet, private, with a clear view of Mount Rainier that guests never forgot after seeing it for the first time. Football inside their house was basically a religion. Every Sunday, if the Seahawks were playing, the entire day revolved around the game. Brian would get up early, turn on the TV, and start grilling wings or burgers for a huge group of friends. They didn't wait for special occasions to celebrate something. That was just how they lived. Open house, good food, everybody welcome. By November of 2007, it looked like they had everything figured out. Their dream home, stable jobs, a strong marriage. Beverly had just started working as a receptionist at a car dealership closer to home, so she wouldn't spend so much time commuting. And the two of them had recently started seriously talking about having a family. Nobody could have imagined that the life they built together would come crashing down because of one unexpected knock at the door. Jeff panicked and called emergency services, then waited outside for deputies to arrive instead of risking going inside alone. The first officer on scene was Sheriff's Deputy James Wilson. Standing in front of him was a man who was visibly shaking so badly he could barely get words out, while pointing toward the damaged front door. Getting inside wasn't difficult. The lower wooden panel had been completely knocked out, leaving an opening large enough for someone to reach through and unlock the door from the inside. The moment the door swung open, Wilson stopped cold. A dark red trail started right there on the hardwood floor near the entrance. Not a few drops, not a small stain. A thick, wide path nearly 3 feet across, stretching through the hallway and onto the light-colored carpet in the living room. Right away, the deputy understood one thing. Nobody inside that house was still alive. The strangest part stood out immediately. Someone had very clearly tried to cover everything up, but the way they did it was bizarre and almost disturbing in its own way. Sheets and blankets had been thrown across the bloodstains, like whoever did this had just grabbed whatever they could find from the nearest bedroom. But it did nothing to hide what had happened inside that house. What made it even worse were the tiny blood specks investigators later noticed on the walls near the living room. Crime scene experts call it cast-off spatter. Eventually, they realized the person responsible had taken an ordinary household broom, dipped it into the blood on the floor, and literally tried sweeping the evidence away across the hardwood. Instead of cleaning anything, the person only made the scene easier for forensic teams to analyze. The broom left behind very specific streak patterns, and droplets from it landed on walls, furniture, and nearby surfaces. Near the kitchen, investigators later found the broom itself along with a dirty rag covered in blood. At that point, one thing became obvious. The criminal hadn't spent 5 rushed minutes inside the house. Whoever did this stayed there for hours, trying to wipe down doorknobs, light switches, and surfaces, but only ended up leaving behind even more smeared marks and traces. At the end of that dark trail, right in the middle of the living room, was the same blue blanket Jeff had seen through the broken door panel. Underneath it were the bodies of the homeowners. Brian was lying face down, still fully dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. Beverly had been placed directly across him, almost perpendicular. She had no clothing on. The criminal had arranged them in the shape of a T, one body over the other, then covered both of them with the same blanket. There was no weapon anywhere nearby, no obvious signs of a struggle either. And at the same time, nothing valuable in the house had been touched. Brian still had cash in his pockets. Expensive electronics sat untouched in multiple rooms. Jewelry was left out in plain sight. Several rifles Brian openly kept inside the home were still there too. A burglar would never ignore something like that. So whatever the motive was, robbery clearly wasn't it. While Deputy Wilson was calling for backup and requesting crime scene investigators, something else happened that immediately raised red flags. Jeff, the only witness and one of the family's closest friends, suddenly disappeared. One moment he was standing beside the deputy. The next, his truck was already turning out of the neighborhood. He didn't wait for detectives, didn't explain where he was going. He simply left. And for someone who had supposedly just discovered two close friends dead inside their home, that behavior looked incredibly suspicious. Not long after that, Sergeant Benjamin Benson arrived on 70th Avenue. He was a veteran investigator with nearly 30 years on the job, somebody who'd already seen more crime scenes than most officers see in a lifetime. But even he was struck by the atmosphere inside the house. The television was still on. The same flickering screen Jeff had noticed back at 5 in the morning was still filling the room with cold blue light, while investigators examined the bodies beneath the blanket. And that detail changed the entire feeling of the case. It meant the criminal didn't panic and run after the attack. Instead, the person stayed inside the living room for hours, calmly watching television, while slowly pretending to clean up the scene. This didn't feel like a random break-in, and it didn't look like a sudden burst of rage either. It felt controlled, drawn out, like someone who was completely comfortable being inside that house. Now detectives had to figure out who could possibly feel that confident spending hours moving around a home beside two people whose lives had just been taken. While forensic teams worked inside, another emotional scene was unfolding outside the police tape. Karen Slater, Beverly's mother, rushed to the neighborhood as soon as she heard from friends that something terrible had happened in Graham. Officers obviously wouldn't allow her near the house, standard procedure. The last thing investigators wanted was contamination of evidence. But Karen didn't arrive there just to grieve. Almost immediately, she told detectives she already knew where they needed to start looking. Beverly had always been extremely close with her mother and shared practically everything with her, including fears and concerns. And according to Karen, during the last month and a half before the crime, the Mock family had become seriously worried about someone. Karen gave detectives a name almost immediately: Jeremy Flynn. He was a 21-year-old guy who lived just a few houses down from the Mocks. About 6 weeks before the crime, Brian and Beverly had hosted a small get-together at their place. Jeremy was there with the rest of the guests, but at some point, he got heavily intoxicated and started acting completely out of line. According to people at the party, he began making aggressive and deeply uncomfortable comments toward Beverly and wouldn't leave her alone. Brian had always been extremely protective of his wife, and there was no way he was going to tolerate that kind of behavior inside his own house. So he confronted Flynn directly and told him to get out. Jeremy left, but not quietly. He stormed out angry, throwing threats around and making it obvious he felt humiliated. The next morning, Brian realized two things were missing from the house. First, Beverly's cell phone was gone. Second, a .357 Magnum revolver had disappeared from a hidden spot inside the home. The couple never filed a police report because Jeremy was related to one of their close friends. They convinced themselves it was probably just drunken stupidity that would eventually blow over, and they didn't want to create major drama inside their friend group. But Beverly later admitted to her mother that after that night, she stopped feeling safe. She believed Jeremy had taken the situation personally and was holding on to real anger. Sometimes, she was even afraid to stay home alone while Brian was at work. For Detective Benson and his new partner, Jason Tate, this looked almost too perfect. A clear conflict, a personal grudge, knowledge of the house layout, and very likely access to the same firearm that disappeared weeks earlier. Police immediately started trying to locate Flynn, but the search quickly got strange. The first address listed on his records turned out to be nothing more than an empty wooded lot. No house, no mailbox, nothing. The second address led detectives to his mother's home, but she claimed she hadn't seen her son in days and had no idea where he was staying. At that point, investigators started wondering if Jeremy was intentionally covering his tracks or already trying to disappear. Detectives then decided to check another location connected to Flynn, a property deep in the woods roughly 10 miles outside Graham. But when Benson and Tate arrived there, they found something nobody expected. The house that was supposed to be on the property had completely burned down. All that remained was a blackened frame, piles of charred debris, and melted metal scattered across the ground. Then investigators uncovered another bizarre detail: When they checked local fire department records, there was no report of any fire in that area. No emergency calls, no firefighters dispatched. Nobody had reported smoke, flames, or anything unusual. The place had burned in complete silence, destroying any possible evidence that Jeremy might have been staying there. At that point, it really felt like the pieces were starting to fit together. The conflict at the party, the missing revolver, now a burned-out house tied to the main suspect. But on the third day of the investigation, the entire case suddenly shifted. Jeremy Flynn called police himself, and according to detectives, he sounded surprisingly calm. He claimed he wasn't hiding at all and had simply been staying with a friend. Jeremy voluntarily came in for questioning and provided what turned out to be a solid alibi. On the same night, Brian and Beverly were found inside their home. Jeremy had reportedly been about 10 miles away drinking with 3 friends, and every one of them backed up his story. Investigators checked it thoroughly. Turns out, Jeremy really hadn't left that group all night. Just like that, the detectives' main theory completely fell apart. And once again, they were standing at the beginning of the case with almost nothing, except a broken front door and 2 unanswered questions. Once the theory about Jeremy Flynn fell apart, detectives were forced to start from scratch. They needed to answer a simple question. If this wasn't an angry neighbor with a grudge, then who was it? So investigators went back out into the area and started rechecking everything from the beginning, digging into every tiny detail they might have missed the first time around. That's how they ended up at the far edge of 70th Avenue, near a mobile home where Daniel and Jennifer Tavares were living. The couple had only moved there a few months earlier, back in July, and the trailer itself sat on property owned by Jeff, the same Jeff who discovered Brian and Beverly inside the house. At that point, detectives realized something strange. Almost every major person connected to this case lived within a few hundred yards of each other. Daniel Tavares greeted police in an extremely friendly way. He worked as a tattoo artist and had even started sketching out a tattoo design for Brian, so he already knew the neighbors pretty well. And then, suddenly, investigators thought they'd hit the jackpot. Daniel said, "Yeah, I saw something." According to him, around 7 o'clock that Saturday morning, he and Jennifer woke up after hearing what sounded like gunshots. Daniel claimed he walked over to the window and saw a red pickup truck parked outside the mock home. He specifically mentioned the truck had an extremely loud exhaust system, but the part that really caught detectives' attention was how detailed his description became after that. Daniel described the man leaving the house almost like he had been standing a few feet away posing for a portrait. He told investigators the person was a white male, around 6'3", well over 200 pounds, with long hair tied back in a ponytail and heavy facial stubble. And then, he added one very specific detail that stood out immediately. The man's face was covered in acne scars. Jennifer backed up her husband's story. She also claimed there was a red pickup truck and said it sped away from the area moments later. For investigators, this felt like a lifeline. Out in a rural area like Graham, a bright red pickup with loud exhaust is the kind of thing people remember. Detectives immediately started checking vehicle registrations, searching through local records, questioning mechanics and auto shops, and looking into everyone connected to Brian and Beverly. Nothing. Not one person matching that description existed anywhere in the couple's circle, and that's when Sergeant Benson started feeling like something was wrong. See, Benson had spent 30 years interviewing witnesses. He understood how memory actually works. When somebody claims they can remember tiny acne scars on a stranger's face several days later, especially someone supposedly seen briefly from a distance in low morning light, that's usually a bad sign. It starts sounding rehearsed, too perfect. Benson also happened to be a licensed pilot, so he decided to personally test Daniel's story. First, he flew over the neighborhood in his plane to get a better sense of the distances involved. Then he returned to the Tavares trailer and asked Daniel to show him the exact window where he claimed he'd witnessed everything. And the second Benson stepped into that bedroom, Daniel's story started collapsing. The window was covered by a thick plastic mesh screen that barely let any light through. There were only 2 narrow openings in it. But the bigger problem was outside. Between the mobile home and the mock property stood a large utility structure, almost like a covered well house, completely blocking the view of the victim's driveway. From where Daniel claimed he was standing, it would have been physically impossible to clearly see the face of somebody leaving the house, let alone notice skin details, scars, or hair color. So now detectives had a new question. Why would someone lie to police in such a detailed and confident way? Was Daniel trying to protect Jeff, considering he was living rent-free on Jeff's property? Or did he have his own, much darker reason for intentionally steering investigators in the wrong direction? Benson didn't let Daniel know the story had fallen apart. He stayed calm, thanked him for his time, and quietly returned to the station. Then he entered Daniel Tavares' name into the system. What came back on the screen genuinely shocked even a veteran detective like Benson. The friendly tattoo artist living down the road turned out to be a convicted criminal with an extremely violent past. Someone who arguably should never have been back out on the street at all. And compared to Daniel's history, Jeremy Flynn suddenly looked like a harmless kid. When Detective Benson hit the enter key on his keyboard, he expected to see the usual stuff: petty thefts, bar fights, maybe issues involving prohibited substances. What he absolutely did not expect was what actually came back on the screen. The database showed a man who, realistically, should never have been walking free in Washington state at all. Detectives learned that Daniel Tavares was far more than a self-taught tattoo artist. He was an extremely dangerous criminal from Somerset, Massachusetts, with a history so disturbing it immediately changed the direction of the investigation. 16 years before the events in Graham, back in January of 1991, Daniel was 25 years old. That night, he committed a crime that's difficult for most people to even process. Inside their family home, Daniel attacked his own mother, Anne Marie Tavares, with a carving knife. Investigators later documented 26 stab wounds. When officers arrived at the scene, Daniel was sitting on the floor, slamming his head against the walls and screaming that he was hearing voices. Over time, he gave several different explanations for what happened. At one point, he claimed someone had slipped him LSD at a bar. Later, he accused his mother of forcing him into inappropriate behavior during his upbringing. Eventually, he accepted a plea deal involving manslaughter charges and received a sentence of 17 to 20 years in a maximum security prison. But prison didn't calm him down. Correctional officers later described Tavares as what they called a cell block warrior, the kind of inmate who turns everyday prison operations into non-stop chaos. According to reports, he spit on guards, threw bodily waste at officers, made constant threats, and created problems almost everywhere he was housed. Because of that behavior, he lost more than 1,000 days of potential sentence reduction for good conduct. 7 years of his sentence were spent inside a special management unit at Cedar Junction, basically a prison inside the prison, reserved for inmates considered especially dangerous or impossible to control. And even there, Daniel somehow managed to negotiate with investigators. In exchange for a reduced minimum sentence, he revealed the location of Gail Botello's remains, a woman who had disappeared years earlier, back in 1988. Investigators eventually located a buried skeleton in the yard connected to Daniel's former property. By June of 2007, Tavares was nearing the end of his sentence, but even then, he had no intention of quietly walking out of prison. Just 3 days before his scheduled release, Daniel attacked 2 correctional officers. Massachusetts prosecutors understood exactly what kind of person they were dealing with and argued that releasing him would be extremely dangerous. They asked Judge Kathy Tutman to set bail at $50,000 so he could remain in custody. Investigators even presented letters Daniel had written from prison. In them, he threatened to break his father's ribs and also sent threats toward then-Governor Mitt Romney. But Judge Tutman made a decision that would later follow her for the rest of her career. She ruled there wasn't enough evidence to consider Daniel a flight risk and released him on personal recognizance. As part of his release conditions, Tavares was ordered to check in with a probation officer 3 times a week. He never planned on doing that. While still in prison, Daniel had created a profile on a dating website designed for inmates and started a relationship with Jennifer Freitas, Jeff's sister, the same woman now living with him in the trailer on 70th Avenue. Just 3 days after walking out of prison, Daniel boarded a plane and traveled 3,000 miles across the country to Washington State. In July, he and Jennifer got married at Point Defiance Park. And just like that, Daniel Tavares officially became the quiet neighbor living down the road from Brian and Beverly Mock. While Washington detectives were chasing the fake story about a red pickup truck, Massachusetts authorities already had an active warrant out for Daniel Tavares for violating parole conditions. By then, Benson understood exactly who he was dealing with. Daniel wasn't just some troubled neighbor. He was a manipulative criminal who knew how to lie, stay calm around police, and make himself look helpful while steering investigators in the wrong direction. Detectives were convinced he was responsible for the crime inside the Mock home. Now they just needed hard evidence, and the crime scene had already given them 2 key clues: a bloody palm print on a bedroom doorframe and a boot print left beneath one of the sheets. So investigators played into Daniel's ego. They casually asked him to provide fingerprints and palm prints for elimination purposes, explaining that since he knew Brian and had visited the house before, they needed to separate his prints from the criminals. Daniel agreed without hesitation, fully convinced he had cleaned the scene perfectly. But the forensic match came back immediately. The bloody print belonged to him. Then detectives caught one final break. During another interview at the station, Daniel stepped out of a patrol car into the rain and left a clear, wet boot print on the concrete. Detective Tate quietly photographed it before it disappeared. The tread matched the same work boots connected to the bloody footprint inside the Mock home. Daniel had unknowingly handed detectives the last piece of evidence himself. Once confronted with the matching prints, he confessed. And the motive sounded unbelievably small. According to Daniel, the entire situation started over $50 he claimed Brian owed him for tattoo work. He showed up at the house around 5 in the morning to collect it. Brian got angry, called him a punk, and tried shutting the door. That's when everything escalated. Daniel kicked in the lower door panel, unlocked the door from the inside, and entered the house armed with a .22 caliber handgun. Brian was shot first. Beverly woke up and ran into the living room after hearing the noise, but Daniel attacked her too. Afterward, he moved the bodies, covered them with sheets, sat watching television for a while, then tried cleaning the scene with a broom. Jennifer later confirmed key parts of the confession. According to her, when Daniel came home, he simply said, "The Mocks won't bother us anymore." Daniel Tavares later pleaded guilty and received life in prison without parole. And Beverly's mother never forgot one specific detail. When Daniel was arrested, he had a fresh black eye, meaning Beverly managed to fight back in her final moments.